Kia ora Aotearoa, welcome to Waatea Fifth Estate, where we wrap the most important news events with the best political panel on television. Streaming live on the dailyblog.co.nz, waateatv.com and broadcast on Face TV, Sky Channel 83. Joining us tonight to discuss the universal basic income in the studio, Director of Unite Union and human rights activist Mike Treen. On the phone, the co-author of the Big Kahuna and economist at the Morgan Foundation, Susan Guthrie. And on Skype, live from Wellington on the eve of the Future of Work conference, the Labour Party Spokesperson on Finance, Robertson. Tonight we look at how we evolve the working lives of New Zealanders. With a democratic system captured by plutocracy and the ever-grinding inequality of global capitalism, how do we safeguard the next generation of workers from being little more than wage slaves? We only have Grant for 10 minutes, so we'll interview him first and then open the discussion up to the panellists. And you at home can send questions in from either the Daily Blog site or the Waatea News site. Grant, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. Why are you embarking upon such an enormous and uncertain task as defining the future of work?
Because it's that important, that the whole notion of what we think of as work is changing. Now, that's always happened. You know, the Industrial Revolution happened and people had to change the way they went about work and their daily lives, moving from agrarian economy to industrialisation. What we're going through at the moment with the automation and the digital revolution and that big globalisation you're alluding to is a really rapid pace of change. You know, we've got a report out that tells us that around 46% of jobs that currently exist in the New Zealand economy won't be here in a decade and a half's time. So we have to be preparing for that. From a Labour Party point of view, we're the party of work, we're the party of workers. When working lives are changing, we've got to be there, taking our values that have been with us throughout our history, but putting them into that 21st century context. So it's a way of thinking about the economy, but putting decent work at the centre of it.
The suggested UBI that has been floated around in the media at the moment has been put at just over $200 per week. For many working poor, that would be a considerable boost to their living standards. But what about beneficiaries? How does $200 a week pull the poorest children out of poverty?
Yeah, look, and it's really important to say, and Susan will be able to give you a lot more detail because that $200 figure comes from the work that she and Gareth Morgan did on the Big Kahuna.
That's right.
We're at very early days in terms of what we're doing at the moment. We want the discussion around the concept of a universal basic income, the idea that we, in this period of huge change that we're coming up to, with more people coming out of the workforce, more people having to do multiple jobs, moving in and out, being less secure about what income they might have, let's talk about a way of providing income security. Now, the exact dimensions of that, how generous it can be, how quickly it can come into being are what we would need to work through. So a figure like $211, yep, sure, sounds like a lot to some people and not enough to others. That's the reality. A true universal basic income at its most pure form is about the interaction of the welfare and the tax systems together, and may well lead you to say, well, that will eventually mean that there won't be any welfare system. There would be an enormous transition process before you reach that point. Right. And one of the things we have to recognise is that there are sick people in our society, disabled people in our society who will always need additional support from society. So no one should be concerned about that. But ultimately, it's about...
Sorry, if we acknowledge that the rate of change that people are looking at in their work, that they're going to be doing so many jobs in their lifetime, if we accept that rate of change is very high, where would you be thinking in terms of implementation? Let's say the Labour Party wins 2017, you've taken this to the polls, the people have gone, yes, we think this is a great idea, we want to see this happen. In your headspace, what is the time frame? Are we looking at something that you would be implementing in your second term, third term, or first term?
Well, I think what we'd want to do is look at, similar to what's happening in a few other places in the world, Finland, Utrecht in the Netherlands, you'd have to do some work piloting and trialling.
Right.
You know, I think it would be important to do that. And, you know, I could envisage a situation where a community that was suffering huge disruption in terms of job losses, you know, maybe, I'm loath to name a community, so the caveat is
Sure.
I'm being hypothetical here. But maybe a community like Huntly,
Right.
that's undergoing a huge transformation in the kind of industries in that town, or the west coast of the South Island, or somewhere like that. Trial it, have a look at it. That's what's happening overseas. We're really interested to see what happens in those trials. And as I say, this is really a response to a changing work environment that, while it's moving quickly, I gave you a 10 to 15 year timescale for those 46% of jobs.
Yeah.
So let's not put the cart before the horse.
Sure.
What we want is a good discussion, which there's no doubt that's happening at the moment around New Zealand.
You're getting flame grilled by the right-wing media right now.
Yeah, let's have a good discussion about the concept, about the importance of ensuring people have income dignity and income security, and then we can start moving to how it would come in.
Would the UBI sorry, Grant, would the UBI be tax-free?
Well, see, it's about the interaction between the tax system and the welfare system.
Yeah.
And so, it's really important to say that if it were to be brought in, it would inevitably be phased in some point. And I think when Susan talks to you in a minute, she'll talk to you a little bit about the way in which superannuation came about in New Zealand.
Okay.
And the way that might give you a guide as to the fact that you can say, we want to create a universal system, here's how we'll do it. But it will be about the interaction of that tax system and the universal income if it were to go ahead. And you would, over time, bring those two things together.
Sure. Gareth Morgan yesterday said the critical issue with turning UBI into reality is how you're going to fund it. How are you going to fund it?
Yeah. And look, as I say, you would obviously over time look at what level of taxation you need to be able to fund it and how the burden of that taxation is spread. And here's the bit where I would differ in principle from Gareth.
Yep.
Is that I still think some form of progressive taxation will be required. Now, Gareth Morgan talks about flat taxes.
Yep.
And that's a very live debate.
It gives them heartburn when you say those things.
Yeah, I know. And so this is where I'm saying Gareth's into the flat taxes. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm still a believer in progressive taxation.
Yep.
But you do have to look at how the tax and income support mechanisms would work together.
Sure.
That's the kind of thing we would investigate as time wears on. But look, this is a conversation that we have to take on in stages. Some people have been thinking about a UBI non-stop for their whole lives.
Yep.
A lot of people have heard this today and thought, what's this about? We've got to work our way through the principles, why it's important, the fact that we're facing this big change, and then we can start moving on whether or not we want to trial it and take it from there.
Final question. We again appreciate your time. What do you hope to come out of the Future of Work conference tomorrow?
Look, it's a milestone for us. This is a 2-year project, the Future of Work Commission. Year 1 was all about listening, getting out, talking to people. I've done dozens of public meetings and business meetings, union meetings, in with school students all over the place.
Yep.
We've had a heap of ideas come in. This is the milestone point where we say, here's where the ideas are going, here's the direction we're going, and we hear from some really interesting people. So we've got Robert Reich here.
Yep.
Tomorrow. We've got Guy Standing, the author of The Precariat. We've got Australian experts around how we get education and training for young people. We've got a Swedish economist, and then we've got a host of business people, union leaders, academics. This is the occasion when we start crunching down the big ideas into policies. And so we're going to have a range of things. Some of them will be more like the directional stuff, should we look at a UBI? Others of them will be much more specific and practical around things like what sort of careers advice do we provide at schools? And we've got to actually have both of those things going on. So tomorrow we'll start road testing some of the ideas, pick up some new ones, and our final report for the Future of Work Commission's November. And then, as I say, that'll be the report that says, here are the policy ideas we think we need to adopt so that New Zealanders can confidently face this changing future of work based on core labour concepts about decent work, fair pay, and making sure that we get fair economic development across New Zealand. It is a big, big project, but it's a way for us to think about the economy that's real. It's not about all the numbers that people chuck around and the percentages. It's about the real economy, which is about productive work and people living decent lives.
Thank you, Grant. Good luck for tomorrow. I'll see you there. Thank you. Cheers. Mike, what did you think? Anything you hear anything there that sort of caught your fancy?
I think it's good that it's being publicly discussed and debated. I think that there are enormous possibilities for human liberation in a universal basic income. If it's set at an appropriate level and able to be funded through the society, and I think that both of those things are possible, and they're not necessarily that scary.
Right.
But if it is actually an income that you can survive on, even a relatively meagre living, then it gives people opportunities for education. It gives people opportunities to be creative. It gives people the opportunities to start a business and see if they are successful or not, to become an artist, to become a musician, to also to simply take time out to look after kids and so on. So all of those things, the possibilities are endless, and if you're not trapped in this
as a wage slave,
for your entire life, and the way society is changing, the speed of change is the important one here. I think Grant is absolutely right there, because there has always been technological change. There has always been the displacement of some labour by other labour.
Absolutely.
And as a rule, capitalism is a growing system, so most people are absorbed most of the time. The problem with capitalism is that it's not all people all the time.
Yep.
That's the problem. So the universal, so being able to support people during those periods of disruption is important. At the moment, we've got a fractured benefit system with 55 or more different ways of accessing sort of entitlements, and we've got this giant bureaucracy. If you set a UBI at an appropriate level, you could abolish WINS, and that would be a hugely liberating thing as well, I think.
For everyone involved.
Yes.
Susan, I'll bring you in now if I can. You co-authored the Big Kahuna, incredible read. It was certainly fascinating insight to me when I gave it a read through. What did you think of what Grant Robertson had to say there?
I think he's grasped absolutely the idea that underpinned the Big Kahuna and why we thought it was important at the time in 2010 to work on it.
Yep.
It is very much a forward-looking, would it be possible to deal with a lot of issues with this sort of radical change in the way we view support that's funded through government transfers. So I think they've absolutely grasped it, and I'm not worried at all that we might differ on how you might fund that, because that really is something that can come later. It's the concept and why you'd want to do it that I think it's really important for people to understand and make their own decision about. So I think it's great that it's being debated in this way right now.
We were following this story online for most of the day, and what we found quite extraordinary was the huge amount of internet traffic and how positive many people online were talking about the idea. Is that a suggestion to you that there's actually a lot of working poor in New Zealand, and the amounts we're talking about would actually be quite a significant change to their life?
I think so. I've been recently doing lots of sort of individual case studies, trying to use census data and thinking now, trying to reproduce what people currently live on through the welfare system and through the way working for families works, and then looking at what the kahuna the proposal that we put together would do. And, without very few exceptions, working families would be better off than they are today. So it is a meaningful amount of money. That $200 a week is huge, but I think people forget too, it's not just the level of income or the lack of it that makes you really stressed and makes you ill and makes your family life difficult. It is not knowing what you're getting next week.
Absolutely,
Really goes your head in, and I think that's what this can offer so much more. It's so important to remember that aspect to it.
Is there a frustration? Obviously, I sort of picked it up reading through the book. There is billions spent in social welfare as a department, and yet it seems to be only for the benefit of the actual bureaucracy. Very little seems to actually go to the people on the front line.
The numbers are enormous when you look at it, and we were quite conservative in the estimates we put in the book, because when you look at things like the student loans and the defaults on the loans, technically they're kind of considered as an expenditure item that the government needs to raise tax to cover.
Right.
So it's not just the actual person sitting in the WINS office, who I don't want to beg the WINS, they do a very hard job.
Absolutely.
But it is an incredibly expensive bureaucracy to run, and at the expense of not just those people sitting in that desk, it's all of the policy work, but all of the loan write-downs and all of the managing of the overpayments, and it is no fun for people on the receiving end of that system.
No, absolutely not. Mike, we saw last week news of the pittance that corporations pay in tax. Who does our current economic structure work for, and does a UBI reach out and help those who it's currently not working for?
Two big questions here. I want to deal with tax first of all. Tax is something that working people pay, and we pay and pay. So whereas the rich treat tax as some sort of voluntary activity, they look at it. They structure their finances they are able to structure their finances and what they do and how they do it in order to minimise tax or reduce tax to zero. And they do it, and they're able to do it through a 1,000,001 mechanisms that are left open for them. I pay tax on money in my wages. I don't even see it, right? I don't see it. I pay tax, so that's 20% probably. I pay 15% on
when you
GST.
buy anything. Yep.
I pay tax on my beer, on my cigarettes, on my petrol, right? All these sin taxes, right? And God knows, it must be 50-60% of my, at the end of the day, I must be paying 50-60% of my income in taxes, right? Now, a person with assets of $50 million, is very unlikely to pay the top marginal tax rate. Well, at least that was true.
Which just seems
when
insane,
it was,
right?
Banks, when banks were caught tax dodging, right? And so what happened to them, right? They had emails going back and forth, and they said, how much tax should we pay? 15%? 12%? Oh, maybe if it's 12%, they might think it's too low, right? Because they were making up the rules for how they pay taxes.
Right.
The government caught them. They owed so many $1 billion, right? And they only have to pay 80% of it back. Well, what sort of, they should have locked the entire board of directors up, made them pay 10 times what they cheated. No, they have to pay, at the end of the day, they have to pay 80% of what they cheated. What sort of system is that? It's an incentive to cheat, right?
Yeah.
So self-employed are given sort of incentives to cheat. Businesses are given incentives to cheat. And so the wealthy, and they set up all these trusts. So again, right? So all these trusts, and and politicians are doing it, right? They're doing it themselves. They have a trust owning a house, their family trust owning a house, which they rent.
Yes.
And are paying. Right, the Deputy Prime Minister is the Minister of Finance is doing this. So he knows it's a rort.
Yeah.
Now, if the rich pay taxes, we could afford to do a whole lot more than we're doing. Right.
Yep.
People resent paying taxes, and the right wing are able to run these anti-tax campaigns because our services, what we get back, is very poor.
Yeah.
Right. They run down our systems. They run down our schools. So we still have to pay. Meant to be free, but we still have to pay fees. They run down the health system. So we're on long waiting lists. The level of the benefits is very poor. Somebody in Denmark doesn't mind paying 40 or 50. They know they're paying 40. They pretend we're not paying 40-50%. We actually are. But somebody in Denmark knows they're paying 40-50%. They actually don't mind because they're getting
good services.
They know what they're getting for it, right? So UBI will actually help reduce, will help combat them, because I think because the only way to make it work is you've got to have a sort of you can have, even if you had a sort of a relatively flat tax system or modest number of steps,
You can still fund this.
You can fund this relatively easily, but you've got to start getting the people who don't pay tax. A foreign corp. What sort of, how is it that we need to allow foreign corporations to simply decide not to pay tax, right? Why should we allow that?
Absolutely. Preach, brother.
We can make rules. We can pass laws. We can do this.
Susan, the UBI, in a way, allows workers and allows New Zealanders and people who are poor to actually have some quality of life. If we don't go down this path, are people just locked into a wage slave situation?
I think it's pretty obvious, like even just the last decade, that the quality of work has really, it's created this big chasm in the middle, and that you've got terribly interesting and rewarding work at the very top, and really horrific, sort of dull and not challenging and not rewarding work at the other extreme. Yeah. So I think very much so we cannot carry on as we are. I think that's pretty obvious. And I think the other thing that's sort of missing in the debate, I guess, particularly because the conference itself is focusing on paid workers, there's an incredible amount of unpaid work spent in our economy.
Right.
I mean, mums looking after kids at home, children looking after their grandparents, and none of that is captured on what we think of as GDP.
Sure.
And yet New Zealand is one of the countries with the highest rate of unpaid work in the world, because we are a very kind of community-focused society. And so I think it's also important to think those people currently are invisible. We don't value their work with any sort of payment. We don't measure it. We don't assist it. We just take it for granted. Right. And I think that it's really important that could be where our future of work is, as such. It's actually community-focused cultural activities that may or may not be sold and bought in the marketplace, but nevertheless are hugely valuable to the rest of us. So
right.
It could change quite differently, the mix of unpaid and paid and caring, but certainly if we don't do something, I think we're going to just see much more of the same, of stressed families, and an ethos where paying tax is optional is developing, and that's really toxic to an economy. So I think the time is right, definitely, to have a complete rethink about how we treat each other, what we do in the economy, what we don't do, and how we should fund ourselves and all our collective activity.
Thank you very much. We're taking questions from viewers right now. This one's from Jay Wiley in Auckland, and this is to both of you. Why isn't there cross-party support for discussion on universal income? Mike, why do we not see a cross-party?
I think we sort of have, and that the Green Party have had this policy, a UBI, an interest in a UBI type of policy, I understand, for quite a while.
Okay.
And mentioned in their last election, I think.
Yep.
The Mana Party did too. I can't speak for the other National Act, but there's elements of the simplification of the policy that I imagine would appeal to them as well. So, I think there is more cross-party support than you might realise.
I think it's seen as a logical thing, and it's seen as economically feasible. So even some very right-wing economists have supported it, right? And Greenspan and the neoliberal types, or Hayek, some very right-wing sort of theoreticians of that inspire some of the more conservative parties, and the ACT Party in particular. I think why they won't do it, and part of the reason why I support it, is that it gives workers protection in their for when they need to change jobs, or they need to tell a boss to shove it, or they need to negotiate collectively.
So they're not as weak and hungry.
No, they're not as weak as hungry. They're in a stronger position, and I think and that's part of the reason that there's been such a growth in inequality, is that they have become so much weaker in Western society, in particular in the last few decades, and this could be a step to rebalancing it, even within a capitalist system, because it doesn't necessarily challenge the economic laws of capitalism.
No.
But
the power relationship,
it might change the power relationship.
Another question, Ros Stewart from Auckland. Isn't UBI another handout? Where's the incentive to work in that? Susan, this has actually been one of the arguments that you've seen quite a bit on a lot of comments online today. Where is the incentive to work?
the incentive to work is current. It's there because you're not penalised for taking work. Now, at the moment, under the welfare system that we have, and under working for families or under the other benefits, which are the sole parents and so on, if you accept extra hours, you're already working part-time, you end up giving an enormous amount of money back on top of paying tax. So there's actually penalty for accepting more work, and that's because of the way which the benefits abate and working for families abates as your income goes up. So in some cases you go to work for less than $1 an hour because you're giving back so much of the government support that you previously had. So the disincentive to work is actually built into our current welfare system and completely absent in the UBI system, because it's the way it can be structured is a completely flat payment. It's not affected by any income you earn. The tax rate you pay is not affected, and so there's absolutely no disincentive to accept the extra hours or to take an extra job or to make work around you, as opposed to being punished for that. So I don't buy at all that this policy would discourage work. In fact, the evidence of studies in the 70s showed it did the opposite. It was actually really helpful for everyone, and in terms of the work never ceased.
So is it people's, Mike, is it people's ignorance of how draconian the current welfare system is that is making people go, I don't understand?
I think so. When I've actually been trying to work out what people are entitled to in the current system, you would not imagine the size of my spreadsheet. It's actually extraordinary as to how complex it is, and then the amounts can be so severely abated back that I think unless you're in that system and you're receiving working for families and you're near those thresholds, you wouldn't have a clue as to how punishing it is to accept an extra few hours of work. And I hear anecdotally all the time people who say, I can't accept that contract because I will lose my working for families entitlement. And so they would love to work, but where is the incentive that make no sense?
So the current system is a disincentive to work. Working people do not need an incentive to work. Whenever there have been high periods of unemployment and hundreds of thousands of people receiving unemployment benefits, the argument was that this would stop people accepting jobs. But as soon as the economy recovers, the numbers on unemployment benefits radically decline, and decline even faster for those groups like Māori and Pacifica who have been disproportionately affected by the rise in unemployment. When it drops, they disproportionately, the number on benefits disproportionately falls as well. So there is no group in society, no matter how stigmatized, that actually doesn't want to work and advance themselves.
That's just a myth, right?
It's just a lie, right? And it's a lie built around prejudice and ignorance, and it needs to be.
We've got to wrap the show, ladies and gentlemen. Susan, I'll quickly ask you, do you think that we will see a UBI as a policy platform for Labour in 2017?
Oh, I hope so. Do I think so? I think there's lots of ways you can introduce it, and I'm sure they'll discover one that works for them. Yep.
Mike?
Not in 2017, but I think we'll have a discussion, and it'll be at least on the agenda for that first term of the next government.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. To my final words this evening. Anytime now. Thank you, panellists. To my final word. We spend billions on welfare, despite huge inequality, and despite a report out this year that showed children in SIFs are actually statistically worse off than staying with their abusers. We are feeding a bureaucracy to be gatekeepers while starving the people who need the welfare. I don't know if the UBI is the answer, but thank God someone is finally asking the questions. Thank you, panellists, for participating, and thank you, whānau, for watching. We'll join you again 7 p.m. tomorrow night for a Waatea 5th Estate, where we will be reviewing the first day of the Future of Work conference. Kia ora, good night.